It was a quiet evening when the city lights started to flicker on one by one, stretching across the skyline like small stars. The hospital parking lot was half full, the kind of calm that came just before the rush of late-night emergencies. Inside her car, a woman sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, looking through the windshield at the large glowing sign that read, St. Mary's Regional Hospital. Her name was Dr. Angela Morris, though most of the hospital staff simply knew her as Dr. Morris, the new director who had taken over a few months ago. But that night she wasn't there in her role as director. She wasn't dressed in a white coat or wearing her name badge. Instead, she wore jeans, a gray hoodie, and a scarf loosely around her neck. Her hair was tied back and she had no makeup on. To anyone who didn't know her, she looked like just another tired woman trying to make it through the day. Angela had been thinking about doing this for weeks. Ever since she had received a few anonymous complaints, letters slipped under her office door, short notes left in her inbox talking about how some patients, especially those who looked poor or came from certain backgrounds, were being treated unfairly. She didn't want to believe it. She had built her whole career on compassion, on fairness, on the belief that hospitals were places where everyone should feel safe. But she also knew the truth. Sometimes people acted differently when no one was watching. She wanted to see for herself. Angela had decided earlier that day that she would visit the hospital as a regular patient. No warning, no assistance, no calls ahead. She wanted to see how her staff behaved when they didn't know who they were talking to. She turned off the car engine, grabbed her small purse, and stepped out into the cool air. The parking lot smelled faintly of rain, even though the clouds had cleared hours ago. She walked slowly toward the entrance, her footsteps echoing on the pavement. As she approached the glass doors, she could already see the reception desk through the window. A nurse sat there, typing something into a computer, her face glowing in the monitor's light. Another nurse walked by carrying a clipboard. Everything looked normal. Angela pushed the door open and the sound of soft music and beeping machines filled her ears. The hospital always had that same clean smell, disinfectant mixed with something metallic, like the scent of a freshly opened medicine packet. She took a deep breath and walked up to the desk. "Good evening," she said softly. The nurse didn't look up right away. She was still typing, her fingers moving quickly on the keyboard. After a few seconds, she glanced up, her expression bored. "Yes? Can I help you?" "I'm not feeling well," Angela said. "I think I might need to see a doctor." The nurse, whose badge read Carol, gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What's the problem exactly?" Angela hesitated for a second, pretending to think. "Just feeling dizzy and short of breath lately. I thought maybe it's nothing serious, but I wanted to get it checked." Carol sighed quietly. "Do you have insurance?" "Yes, I do," Angela said. The nurse nodded without enthusiasm and handed her a clipboard with a form. "Fill this out and have a seat. We're kind of full tonight, so it might be a while before someone can see you." "That's okay," Angela said. "I'll wait." She took the clipboard and turned toward the waiting area. There were only a few people sitting there, an elderly man holding his arm, a young mother with a sleepy child, and a teenager scrolling through his phone. It didn't look busy, but Angela decided not to question it. She filled out the form, keeping her handwriting neat but unremarkable, then brought it back to the desk. "Here you go," she said. "Thanks," Carol replied flatly. She placed the form on a stack without looking at it. Angela sat down in one of the plastic chairs, crossed her legs, and began to observe quietly. Over the next 15 minutes, she noticed small things. A man who had come in after her was called in quickly, even though his injury seemed minor, a small cut on his hand. Another woman, who appeared well-dressed and spoke in a confident tone, was guided straight to a room without waiting. Angela sat there still and calm, her eyes following the nurse at the front desk. Carol chatted politely with some patients, but her tone changed depending on who she was speaking to. When she talked to people who looked wealthy or spoke clearly, she smiled more. When she spoke to others, people who looked tired, worried, or poor, her tone grew sharper, shorter. Angela felt a dull heaviness in her chest. She had hoped this wasn't true. Half an hour passed. The room grew quieter. The young mother left with her child after being called in. The teenager dozed off in his chair. Angela's stomach growled softly, reminding her she hadn't eaten dinner yet. She stood and walked to the desk again. "Excuse me," she said gently. I just wanted to check how long it might be before I can see someone. I'm starting to feel a bit lightheaded. Carol looked up briefly, then back down at her computer. Ma'am, we're doing the best we can. There are other patients ahead of you. Please take a seat. Angela nodded slowly. Of course. She returned to her seat. Her eyes flicked to the hallway leading deeper into the hospital. She could see nurses moving back and forth, doctors in scrubs. The faint hum of busy life beyond the waiting area. It was the same hospital she led, but from here it felt so different. Cold, impersonal, almost indifferent. Another 20 minutes went by. Angela kept watching. The man who had come in with a cut on his hand came back out, smiling and joking with a nurse. 2 paramedics wheeled in another patient, and the nurses sprang into action, rushing to help. For a few moments, the energy in the room shifted, and Angela saw flashes of the compassion she always believed her team had. But then, when things calmed again, the front desk returned to its routine. At one point, a middle-aged man came in limping badly, clearly in pain. He walked up to the desk and tried to explain his injury. Carol frowned and asked if he had an appointment. He said no. She told him to wait. The man groaned and limped to a seat, wincing. Angela watched as he wiped sweat from his forehead, clearly struggling. No one offered him water. No one asked if he needed help. Angela's fingers tightened around her purse strap. She wanted to step in, to speak up, but she reminded herself this was exactly why she was there. She needed to see what ordinary people saw. After about an hour, Angela noticed the same well-dressed woman from earlier returning from her checkup. She smiled and waved to Carol, who waved back warmly. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Angela stood again and approached the desk one more time. I'm really sorry, she said quietly. But I've been waiting a while and I'm starting to feel worse. Is there any way someone could at least check my blood pressure or something? Carol exhaled sharply, her tone clipped. Ma'am, I already told you, we're full. If you're feeling that bad, maybe go to another hospital. Angela blinked, surprised. I'm just asking for a quick check. I don't mind waiting after that. Look, you can't just demand special treatment, Carol snapped. We'll call you when it's your turn. Please take a seat. The sharpness of the words hung in the air. A few people looked up. The man with the injured leg frowned as if recognizing the unfairness of the situation. Angela didn't argue. She simply nodded and walked back to her seat. Her heartbeat was steady, but her thoughts were racing. So it was true. This wasn't about being busy or understaffed. It was about attitude, about who someone thought deserved to be treated kindly. Angela sat quietly, looking around the room once more. Every small detail, the flicker of the fluorescent light, the faint sound of the printer, the nurse's indifferent tone, seemed to speak louder now. She had worked in hospitals for over 20 years. She had seen emergencies, heartbreaks, and miracles. She had seen staff work themselves to exhaustion for strangers. But she had also seen how small biases could creep into places that should have been free of judgment. She felt the weight of that reality sitting on her chest. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes unfocused, thinking about how many people must have experienced this kind of quiet dismissal, how many had walked away, untreated, simply because someone decided they didn't look important enough. After another 10 minutes, Angela decided she had seen enough for one night. She stood up slowly, grabbed her bag, and approached the desk again, not out of anger but with quiet purpose. Carol glanced up, a bit annoyed. Yes, ma'am? Angela smiled faintly. Thank you for your time. I think I'll come back another day. Carol shrugged. Okay. Angela turned to leave but paused near the door. She looked back for a brief second at the waiting area. The man holding his leg, the sleepy teenager, the quiet hum of the hospital. Then she stepped outside into the cool night air. The wind had picked up, brushing strands of hair across her face. She took out her car keys and looked back at the hospital building. Tomorrow she would come back, but not like this. Tomorrow she would return as herself, the director, and she would ask questions that couldn't be ignored. As she got into her car, she whispered softly to herself, Now I know. The engine started, and she drove off into the night, the hospital lights growing smaller in her rearview mirror. Inside the building she had just left, life went on as usual. The nurses chatted at the desk. The intercom called for doctors and patients waited, not knowing that the woman they had seen sitting quietly among them was the very person who ran the hospital. Angela's heart felt heavy, but beneath the sadness there was determination. What she had witnessed that night wasn't just an isolated act of rudeness. It was a symptom of something deeper, something she was now ready to confront. For the first time since she took the job, she understood exactly what kind of change her hospital needed, and she was ready to make it happen. The next morning came quietly. The sunlight slipped through the half-open blinds in Angela's apartment, casting thin lines across the wooden floor. She hadn't slept much. The image of the hospital waiting room, the tired faces, and the way that nurse spoke to her kept playing in her mind. Angela sat at the small table near the window, a cup of coffee in her hands, staring out at the quiet street. It was strange to think that the place she had worked so hard to lead, the place she had trusted, had shown her a side she wished she hadn't seen. When she first became the hospital director, she promised herself she'd make St. Mary's a place where kindness came first, where patients were treated not just as cases but as people. She had even given speeches about it, about respect, empathy, and equality. She believed those words. She lived by them. But last night showed her how far the hospital still had to go. She sighed and set her cup down. She knew what she had to do next. Angela got ready for work, this time putting on her professional clothes, a crisp navy suit and her hospital ID badge that read, Dr. Angela Morris, Hospital Director. Her posture straightened, and her face took on that quiet authority she was known for. But underneath the calm surface, she felt something heavier. Not anger exactly, but disappointment. When she arrived at the hospital, the morning rush had already started. Doctors moved quickly through the hallways. Nurses carried charts, and the smell of coffee mixed with the faint scent of disinfectant. Everything looked the same as always, but to Angela, the place felt different now, like she was seeing it with new eyes. She greeted a few staff members on her way to her office. They smiled politely, some a bit nervously. She was still fairly new to the position, and though she was known for being fair and kind, her presence carried weight. As soon as she reached her office, her assistant, a soft-spoken woman named Laura, stepped in. "Good morning, Dr. Morris," she said. "You have a meeting with the department heads at 10, and the facilities report is ready for review." "Thank you," Angela said. "But before that, I want to take a walk through the emergency department." Laura looked slightly surprised. "Would you like me to inform them you're coming?" "No," Angela said, her tone calm. "I'd rather just drop by." Laura nodded. "Of course." Angela left her office and made her way to the emergency wing. As she got closer, the sounds grew louder. Voices, footsteps, the rolling of stretchers. When she walked through the main doors, a few heads turned. Some nurses smiled politely. Others whispered quietly to one another. Behind the reception desk was the same nurse from last night, Carol. Angela's steps slowed for a moment as she watched from a short distance. Carol was talking to another patient, a man holding a bandaged hand. Her tone was friendly now, professional even. She smiled and typed something into the computer. Angela waited until the man left the desk before she approached. "Good morning," she said, softly. Carol looked up and froze for a brief second, before quickly straightening in her chair. "Oh, good morning, Dr. Morris. Busy morning?" Angela asked. "A little," Carol said, forcing a smile. "But we're managing." Angela nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "That's good to hear." There was an awkward pause. The other nurses nearby suddenly seemed busier, pretending not to listen. Angela's gaze flicked to the waiting area, then back to Carol. "Could I speak with you in my office later this afternoon?" Carol's face tightened slightly. "Of course, Dr. Morris. Is everything all right?" "Yes," Angela said quietly. "I just want to talk about how things have been running here. Nothing to worry about." Carol nodded quickly, though her hands fidgeted slightly. "Of course." Angela gave a polite smile and turned to walk away, leaving behind a silence that seemed to stretch through the room. As she walked down the hallway, she thought about how strange life could be. Just 12 hours ago, this same nurse had dismissed her without a second thought. Now the same woman stood nervous, polite, careful with her words. The difference was a badge. Angela spent the rest of the morning checking in with other departments. She talked to doctors, janitors, and volunteers, asking small questions about how they were doing, what issues they faced, and how patients were treated. Most of them seemed honest and kind. Many spoke highly of the hospital's teamwork, but there were small hints, tiny details about attitude problems at the front desk, impatience during busy hours, and how some staff lost their manners when dealing with certain kinds of people. By the time the clock struck 1, Angela knew that her quiet experiment from last night hadn't been an overreaction. It was a sign of a larger issue, something that went deeper than one nurse's behavior. That afternoon, Carol knocked on her office door. "Come in," Angela said. Looking up from a file, Carol stepped inside. Holding her hands together, her voice soft. "You wanted to see me, Dr. Morris?" "Yes, please have a seat," Angela said. Carol sat down slowly. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Angela didn't speak right away. She simply looked at the nurse for a few seconds, calm but serious. "Carol," she began, "how long have you been working here?" "Almost 8 years," Carol said quickly. "I've been at this desk for most of that time," Angela nodded. "That's a long time. You must know how everything works here." "Yes, ma'am." "I've heard from several people that you're efficient and reliable," Angela said. "That's good. I appreciate people who take their work seriously." "Thank you," Carol said, looking relieved. Angela paused. "But I want to ask you something. How do you decide who gets helped first when the waiting area isn't full?" Carol blinked. "Well, we usually follow the triage list. Patients with more serious conditions go first, of course." Angela tilted her head slightly. "Of course. And how do you determine what's serious when someone walks in?" Carol hesitated. "We look at symptoms, how they describe their pain, visible signs of distress, and, well, sometimes experience tells you a lot." Angela's gaze softened. "Experience can be helpful, yes, but it can also make us assume things." Carol frowned a little. "I'm not sure I understand." Angela leaned forward slightly, her tone gentle but steady. "Carol, last night I came here. I wasn't wearing my work clothes and I didn't have my badge on. I came as a regular person who said she wasn't feeling well." Carol's face went pale. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Angela continued calmly. "You told me the hospital was full. You told me to wait for hours, even though others who came after me were seen right away. And when I asked again, you told me maybe I should go somewhere else." Carol's eyes widened. "Dr. Morris, I didn't realize." Angela held up a hand gently. "That's the problem, Carol. You didn't realize who I was. But what if I had really been sick? What if someone without power or position needed help that night?" Tears started forming in Carol's eyes. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Morris. I didn't mean—" "I know you probably didn't mean harm," Angela said softly. "But intention doesn't erase the impact. How many others might have been treated that way?" Carol looked down, ashamed. Her voice was small. "Sometimes it gets stressful at night. Some people come in for things that aren't emergencies and we get overwhelmed." "I understand that," Angela said kindly. "But being overwhelmed doesn't give us permission to lose our compassion." There was a long silence. Carol wiped her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Angela leaned back in her chair. "I'm not going to fire you, Carol. That's not what this is about. But this situation has shown me something important. It's not just about one person. It's about the culture we allow to grow here." Carol nodded slowly, still looking down. Angela stood and walked to the window, watching the cars pass outside. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Hospitals are meant to heal, not just bodies but hearts too. Every patient who walks through those doors should feel safe, no matter how they look, speak, or dress. Last night I felt invisible. And I lead this hospital. Imagine how others must feel." Carol didn't answer. Her shoulders shook slightly as she nodded, whispering, "You're right." Angela turned back and gave a small, forgiving smile. "I'm not angry, Carol, but I do need things to change." "And I'd like your help to make that happen." "My help?" Carol asked, surprised. "Yes," Angela said. "You've been here 8 years. You understand the daily pressures, the staff moods, the moments when things get tense. I want you to help me design a training program for the front desk team. Something about empathy, active listening, fairness. Something that reminds us why we're here." Carol blinked in disbelief. "You'd want me to help with that?" "Yes," Angela said softly. "Because growth starts when we face what went wrong and learn from it." For the first time since walking in, Carol smiled faintly. It was a small, trembling smile, but it was real. "I'd be honored to help," Angela nodded. "Good. Let's start working on it next week." When Carol left the office, Angela sat quietly for a long moment, letting the silence fill the room. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she felt something shift. That evening, she walked through the hospital again, this time with a notebook in hand. She stopped to talk with patients in the waiting area, asking how their experience had been. Most said it was fine, but a few shared small frustrations, times they felt ignored, rushed, or dismissed. Angela wrote everything down. Later, in the break room, she spoke to a few nurses about compassion and stress management. One nurse admitted, "Sometimes we forget to slow down. We deal with so many cases that we stop seeing faces." Angela smiled gently. "Then it's time to start seeing them again." That night, when she finally left the hospital, the city lights glowed just as they had the night before. But this time Angela felt lighter. She knew there was still a lot of work to do. Changing habits and attitudes would take time. But now she had proof, real, painful proof of what needed to change. And she had a plan to make it happen. As she walked to her car, a few staff members passed by, greeting her warmly. She smiled back, but her mind was already somewhere else, thinking about how many hospitals across the country might face the same problem. How many patients walked away feeling unseen every day. She couldn't fix the whole world, but she could start here, and she would, because no one, absolutely no one, should have to earn kindness. The next few days at the hospital moved fast. The morning announcements echoed through the halls. The sound of footsteps filled the corridors, and nurses hurried between patients, pushing carts and carrying clipboards. Everything looked normal, but beneath the surface something was changing. Angela had quietly started setting things in motion. After her talk with the nurse, she met with her senior staff to discuss new plans for improving patient care. She didn't tell them what had happened that night, at least not yet. She wanted to handle it carefully, to make sure the message reached everyone without turning into gossip or blame. She spent long hours in her office reviewing procedures, policies, and reports from the emergency department. The complaints she had received before now made perfect sense. She could see the patterns clearly: delays, dismissive communication, uneven treatment. Not all of it came from bad intentions. Sometimes it came from burnout, exhaustion, or simply forgetting that every person sitting in that waiting room was scared and needed kindness. But Angela believed change had to start somewhere. By midweek, she decided it was time to speak to everyone at once. She sent out a hospital-wide email asking all staff, doctors, nurses, receptionists, even janitors, to attend a short meeting in the main conference hall on Friday morning. The message was simple: mandatory staff meeting to discuss patient care improvements and hospital values. Rumors started to spread almost immediately. Some thought it was just another training announcement. Others whispered that something big must have happened. Angela kept her calm, answering questions politely but giving away nothing. Friday came quickly. The conference hall filled with the hum of voices. Rows of chairs faced a small stage at the front, where a microphone and projector had been set up. The staff trickled in, chatting quietly, some with cups of coffee in hand, others looking tired from the morning rush. Angela stood behind the curtain for a moment, taking a deep breath. She wasn't nervous exactly, but she wanted her words to matter. She didn't want this to feel like a lecture. She wanted it to feel like a wake-up call. When she stepped onto the stage, the room went still. Conversations faded. Everyone turned toward her. "Good morning," she said, smiling softly. "Thank you all for coming. I know you're busy, and I appreciate you taking the time." Her voice carried through the hall easily. She had that quiet confidence that made people listen. "I called this meeting because I want to talk about something that's more important than any policy, procedure, or statistic. I want to talk about how we treat people, our patients, their families, and even one another." She paused, letting the words sink in. "In the past few months, I've received letters and reports from patients who felt ignored or dismissed when they came to us for help. At first I thought maybe it was just a misunderstanding, but then I decided to see for myself." The room was completely silent now. Angela looked around, scanning the faces in front of her: doctors, nurses, reception staff, cleaners, administrators. She could see curiosity, confusion, and a little worry. "So one night," she continued, "I came to this hospital, not as the director, but as a patient. I didn't wear my badge. I didn't announce who I was. I just walked in through the emergency doors, said I wasn't feeling well, and asked for help. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. I sat in that waiting room for over an hour, she said softly. I watched as people who came after me were helped first. I saw smiles for some patients and cold words for others, and when I finally asked if someone could just check my blood pressure, I was told maybe I should go somewhere else. Several people gasped quietly. Others looked at each other in disbelief. Angela didn't raise her voice, but her calm tone made every word hit harder. I left that night feeling small, she said. Invisible. I felt what too many of our patients must feel when they come here scared, hurting, and uncertain, and are met not with care, but with indifference. Her gaze softened, but her expression stayed firm. The sad part is, the nurse who spoke to me wasn't cruel. She was tired, overworked, maybe frustrated, but that doesn't excuse it. Because every person who walks through those doors deserves kindness, no matter what they look like, how they talk, or what they wear. For a long moment, no one moved. Angela took a slow breath before continuing. I'm not sharing this to embarrass anyone. I'm sharing it because I love this hospital. I believe in what we do here, and I believe we can do better. From the third row, someone raised a hand. Dr. Morris, a young nurse said softly. May I ask what happened after that? Angela smiled faintly. The next day, I came back as myself. I spoke with the nurse who turned me away. She apologized. And instead of punishing her, I asked her to help me fix this. Because change doesn't happen from punishment. It happens from understanding. Several heads nodded. The tension in the room started to ease. Angela continued. We're going to start something new. A compassion and empathy training program for all staff. Not a boring lecture, not a box-ticking exercise, but real conversations about how we speak, how we listen, and how we see people. We'll use real stories, real experiences, because we need to remember that hospitals aren't just about medicine. They're about humanity. She took a step closer to the edge of the stage. We all have bad days. We all get tired. But what defines us is how we treat others even on those days. A quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Angela smiled softly. When I was a little girl, my grandmother used to say, you can't heal people if you don't see them. And I think that's true. We have to see people, really see them. Their fear, their pain, their hope. That's what makes us good at what we do. She paused and looked around the room once more. I don't expect perfection. I just expect effort. I expect every one of us to remember that the person sitting across from us might be someone's mother, father, child, or friend. They might be scared, and one kind word can make all the difference. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then slowly people began to clap. The sound started softly, then grew louder until the entire hall was filled with applause. Angela felt a warmth spread through her chest. Not pride exactly, but relief. She had worried that her story might make people defensive, but instead it seemed to open something up. After the meeting ended, several staff members came up to her. Some apologized for what had happened, even though they weren't the ones involved. Others shared their own stories, times they had seen unfair treatment, moments they wished they'd spoken up. One young nurse said, Dr. Morris, sometimes we forget that patients notice everything. It's easy to get caught up in the routine. Angela nodded. I know. That's why we're going to remind each other from now on. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the hospital halls, she noticed small things already starting to shift. A receptionist greeted a patient with a smile instead of a sigh. A nurse knelt beside a worried mother to explain her child's test results slowly and kindly. They were small acts, but they mattered. When Angela passed the emergency desk, Carol was there again. She looked up and met Angela's eyes with a mix of respect and humility. Dr. Morris, she said softly, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me another chance, and for what you said today. It really made me think. Angela smiled gently. I'm glad to hear that. Remember, Carol, every day we get a chance to be better than yesterday. Carol nodded, her expression sincere. Angela continued down the hall, her heels clicking lightly against the floor. She stopped for a moment by the waiting area and watched as a few patients sat quietly, reading magazines or talking softly. She could feel the energy there beginning to change. Less tense, more welcoming. She knew it would take time. Real change always did, but she could already see the first signs of hope. That evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Angela stayed behind in her office, looking out the window. The lights of the hospital glowed softly in the distance. She thought about the faces she had seen that day. The tired nurse, the young doctor eager to learn, the worried patients waiting for news. She thought about her grandmother's words again, the ones she'd shared earlier. You can't heal people if you don't see them. Angela picked up her pen and started jotting down ideas for the new program. She wanted to include stories from both staff and patients, moments of compassion but also mistakes they could learn from. She wanted it to be real. As she wrote, a knock came at the door. "Come in," she said. It was Laura, her assistant. "Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Morris. I just wanted to say, the staff meeting today really touched people. I've had so many come to me saying they want to help with the new training sessions." Angela smiled. "That's wonderful news." "Thank you, Laura." Laura hesitated before speaking again. "If you don't mind me asking, what made you decide to test the hospital that way? Coming in as a patient?" Angela looked down at her notes for a moment, then back up. "Because sometimes the truth hides behind politeness, and the only way to see it is to stand where others stand, to feel what they feel." Laura nodded slowly. "That's brave." Angela smiled faintly. "Not brave, just necessary." After Laura left, Angela leaned back in her chair. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the lights. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering that night again. The feeling of sitting alone in that waiting room. The sting of being dismissed. The silence that made her feel unseen. It had hurt, but maybe that pain had been worth it, because it opened a door not just for her, but for everyone who worked there. She looked back out the window once more. The reflection of the hospital sign glowing faintly against the glass. This was only the beginning. A week had passed since the staff meeting, and the atmosphere at the hospital had already started to feel different. It wasn't perfect, but it was softer somehow. The smiles came easier. The voices at the front desk sounded kinder. There was less rushing past patients and more stopping to ask, "Are you okay?" Angela noticed it right away. Every morning she walked through the corridors quietly, just observing. She didn't make a show of it or carry a clipboard like an inspector. She just watched. She saw nurses holding doors for elderly patients, a doctor pausing between appointments to reassure a worried father, and even Carol, now one of the most polite people at the reception desk, speaking with patience to a frustrated visitor. It made Angela feel hopeful. Maybe the meeting had reached people's hearts after all. Still, she knew it was too early to celebrate. Real change took time, and not everyone accepted it right away. There were whispers that some staff thought she had gone too far, that her story had embarrassed the department. Others said it was inspiring. Angela didn't worry about the mix of opinions. What mattered was that people were talking and thinking. That morning, Angela received a call from the hospital board. They had heard about the meeting and wanted to commend her for handling the situation with grace. They also wanted her to share the story publicly at an upcoming hospital fundraiser event, where donors and media would be present. Angela hesitated. The idea of turning something so personal into a public story felt uncomfortable. But then she thought about what could happen if people outside the hospital heard it too. If other medical staff, hospital leaders, and even patients learned from it. She agreed. The event was scheduled for Friday evening in the hospital's main auditorium. Angela didn't tell anyone exactly what she was going to talk about, only that she would be sharing an important story about the meaning of compassion in healthcare. When Friday arrived, the hospital looked almost festive. The lobby had been decorated with flowers, and a small stage stood at the front of the room with a microphone and soft lighting. Rows of chairs filled up quickly with hospital employees, board members, and visitors. Reporters with cameras stood near the back. Angela stood behind the curtain for a moment, holding a small note card in her hand. She didn't plan to read from it. It was just a safety net in case her emotions got the better of her. She took a slow breath and reminded herself why she was doing this. The announcer stepped up and introduced her. "Please welcome our hospital director, Dr. Angela Morris, who has a very special message to share with us tonight." Applause filled the room. Angela walked out calmly, her heels clicking lightly against the stage floor. She smiled, thanked the audience, and began to speak. "Good evening, everyone," she said warmly. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This hospital means a lot to me, not because of its walls or its equipment, but because of the people inside it. Every day, you show up for others. You heal, you comfort, and you carry the weight of so many lives. That is not an easy job. She paused, scanning the audience. But I want to tell you about a night that changed the way I see this hospital, and myself. The crowd quieted. Not long ago, Angela continued, I came here as a patient. Not as a doctor. Not as your director. Just a tired woman who didn't feel well. I didn't wear my badge. I didn't introduce myself. I just walked through those doors like any other person seeking help. She described how she had waited in the lobby, how she had watched others being treated before her, and how she had been told to wait or leave. She didn't name anyone, but everyone in the hospital knew who had been on duty that night. She explained how it felt to be invisible in a place that should have made her feel safe. Her voice stayed calm and steady, but her words carried weight. In that moment, she said softly, I realized something important. Our hospital is excellent at treating wounds, infections, and diseases. But sometimes we forget to treat the invisible things like fear, shame, and loneliness. And those hurt just as much. The audience was silent. Some nurses looked down. A few people wiped their eyes quietly. Angela continued, I don't share this story to blame anyone. I share it because I believe we can be better. That's why I started the Compassion program. For all of us to remember that kindness is not a bonus in healthcare. It's part of the cure. Her words hung in the air like a soft echo. Then she added, if we can make even one person feel seen and valued every day, then we've done our job right. Applause began to spread through the room. Slowly at first, then stronger until it filled every corner. Cameras flashed. People stood clapping not just out of respect but out of understanding. As the applause faded, Angela smiled and stepped down from the stage. She shook hands, accepted hugs, and listened as people thanked her for sharing her story. One older nurse told her, I've been working here 30 years and I've never heard a director speak like that. You reminded me why I started nursing. Angela thanked her, feeling a lump in her throat. After the event ended, she walked through the quiet hospital halls. Most of the guests had gone, but a few patients still lingered in the waiting areas. One of them, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, smiled at her and said softly, You're the lady from the stage, right? That story. It made me feel like I mattered. Thank you, Angela smiled back. You do matter, she said gently. Later that night, when she stepped outside, she saw a few staff members standing near the entrance talking among themselves. Carol was there too, holding a cup of tea. When she saw Angela, she walked over looking emotional. Dr. Morris, she said quietly, I listened to your speech. I can't stop thinking about that night. I wish I could go back and change it. Angela placed a hand on her shoulder. You already have, she said. You're different now. I see it every day. Carol smiled faintly. I never realized how my tone could make someone feel so small. I think about that every time I talk to a patient now. I even apologized to a man today when I got impatient. He said it was okay, but I could tell it meant something. Angela nodded, touched by the honesty. That's exactly what growth looks like. They stood in silence for a moment, the cool air wrapping around them. Then Carol spoke again. You know, when I first found out who you were that night, I felt terrified. But now I'm grateful it happened. I needed that wake-up call. Angela smiled softly. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that make us better people. As she drove home later, Angela thought about how much had changed in just a few short weeks. The hospital that once felt cold and rushed was beginning to feel warm again. The walls seemed to carry more compassion, more human connection, but not everyone was on board yet. The next morning, she overheard two younger staff members talking near the break room. All this kindness stuff is nice, one said, but it's slowing things down. We're supposed to treat patients fast, not hold their hands. Angela didn't interrupt them. She just listened quietly as she filled her coffee cup. The other replied, Maybe. But have you noticed people complaining less lately? The waiting room feels calmer. I think it's worth it. Angela smiled to herself and walked away. She knew change always came with resistance. But for every skeptic, there were 5 others who believed in what they were doing. That afternoon, a small surprise came her way. A patient she had never met asked to see her. He was an older man recovering from surgery. When she entered his room, he smiled weakly and said, I heard what you said at that event last night. The nurses told me the story. I just wanted to thank you. I've been to a lot of hospitals in my life, but this is the first time I've felt treated like a person, not a number. Angela's eyes softened. That means a lot. Thank you for telling me. He nodded slowly. It's easy to forget that kindness heals too. Those words stayed with her the rest of the day. Later, she walked through the emergency room again, the same place where everything had started. The waiting area was still busy, but it felt different. The front desk had a calm energy. Carol was helping a young woman who looked anxious. Her voice was patient and kind. She offered her water and assured her she would be seen soon. Angela stood quietly nearby, unseen by most, watching the small miracle unfold. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a big gesture, but it was real. When the woman smiled faintly and said thank you, Carol returned it with warmth. That simple exchange meant more to Angela than any speech or award ever could. As the night went on, Angela stayed late, reviewing notes for the next training session. She planned to expand the program to include real stories from patients, anonymous letters that shared their experiences, both good and bad. She wanted her team to feel those emotions, to understand what it was like on the other side of the counter. Before leaving for the night, she took one last walk through the hospital corridors. The lights were dim, the halls quiet except for the distant sound of machines beeping softly. She paused near the main entrance where she had stood weeks ago, dressed in plain clothes, ignored and unseen. This time, as she looked around, she felt peace. She thought about how easily power and titles could build walls and how humility could tear them down. That night she had been just another woman in need of help, and that experience had become her greatest teacher. As she locked her office and prepared to leave, she whispered to herself, "We're getting there." Outside, the night breeze was cool against her face. She looked back at the hospital one last time before heading to her car. The building glowed softly under the streetlights. Inside those walls, people were healing, not just physically but emotionally too. Angela knew there would still be hard days ahead. There would still be moments of frustration, mistakes, and tired voices. But now there was also something stronger: awareness, empathy, and a growing sense of unity. And as she drove away, she couldn't help but smile, knowing that a single night of being unseen had led to something far greater than she had ever planned. It had sparked a change that was spreading from one person to another, quietly, powerfully, like light finding its way into every dark corner. It wasn't just about fixing a hospital anymore. It was about reminding everyone, including herself, what it truly meant to care. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks quietly slipped into months. The hospital, once a place of noise and hurry, began to carry a different kind of rhythm. There was still the sound of footsteps rushing down hallways and the steady hum of machines. But underneath all that, something softer had taken root. Angela noticed it in small ways first. The receptionist, who used to speak with a flat, tired tone, now greeted each person with a smile. The janitor, who had always stayed quiet, started chatting with patients while cleaning the waiting area, making them laugh. Even the doctors, who were always buried under charts and reports, began taking a few extra minutes to explain things to patients who looked lost. It wasn't perfect, of course. Hospitals rarely are. There were still stressful nights and overworked staff. There were still moments when tempers flared or mistakes happened. But something had changed deep inside the heart of the place. It had become more human. One morning, Angela walked through the pediatric wing. She loved visiting that floor. The walls were painted with cheerful colors and little drawings of animals and stars. Children waved from their beds and nurses moved around gently with patience and warmth. A small boy sitting in a wheelchair called out to her. "Are you the lady from the poster?" he asked, pointing to a photo on the wall near the nurses' station. It was an image from the fundraiser event, Angela standing at the podium, smiling. She chuckled softly. "Yes, I guess that's me." "My mom said you help people be nicer here," he said with a toothy grin. Angela knelt beside him. "I'm trying," she said kindly. "But it's really all of you who help us remember why we're here." The boy smiled proudly, then waved goodbye as a nurse came to take him for his therapy session. Angela stood up and felt a wave of quiet gratitude. These were the moments that reminded her why she'd chosen this path in the first place. Not for the title, not for the meetings, but for the people. Later that day, Angela met with her leadership team. They were discussing how to expand the compassion training program to other hospitals in their network. The board members had seen measurable changes, not just in patient satisfaction but in staff morale and teamwork. One of the administrators said, "It's incredible how quickly this turned around." "You've done something special here, Dr. Morris." Angela smiled. "It's not just me. It's all of us. When people feel valued, they give their best. That's what changed everything." The others nodded. There was a sense of shared pride in the room, but Angela never let it become about praise. She always turned the focus back to the mission: better care, kinder hearts. After the meeting, she went for a walk around the hospital grounds. It was a warm afternoon, the kind that carried a gentle breeze and the scent of flowers from the nearby garden. The benches outside were full of families waiting for loved ones, sharing quiet conversations and coffee. Near the entrance, Angela saw Carol again. She was helping an elderly man out of a taxi, holding his arm carefully and speaking to him with genuine care. The man smiled as she guided him inside. Angela stood at a distance, watching for a moment. The same woman who had once turned her away without a glance was now one of the most compassionate staff members in the hospital. It was proof that people could change if they were given a chance and a reason to. Later that evening, Carol stopped by Angela's office. "I just wanted to say thank you again," she said softly. "For not giving up on me." Angela shook her head. "I didn't have to. You did the hard part yourself." Carol hesitated, then said, "I've been thinking a lot lately. You know, that night, it changed me. I was tired and impatient. I didn't even realize how I sounded until I saw the look on your face. That moment taught me more than any class ever could." Angela smiled gently. "Sometimes we learn our biggest lessons in the hardest way. What matters is that we don't stay the same afterward." Carol nodded. "I don't think I ever will." After she left, Angela sat quietly at her desk. She thought about how easily things could have gone differently. If she had walked away that night without saying anything, the problem would have stayed hidden. But by facing it, she had not only changed a hospital, she had changed people. That thought filled her with both pride and humility. A few days later, a letter arrived on her desk. It was handwritten, something rare in those days. The return address was from a woman named Lila, a patient who had been in the emergency department recently. The letter read, "Dear Dr. Morris, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to tell you something. Last week I came to your hospital late at night. I was scared and alone. I didn't expect much, to be honest. I've had bad experiences before, but this time was different." The nurse at the front desk smiled at me. She asked if I was okay. She got me a blanket while I waited. It might not seem like much, but to me it meant everything. I felt seen. I felt safe. Thank you for creating a place like that. With gratitude, Angela read the letter twice. Then she placed it gently in a folder where she kept reminders. Notes, thank you cards, small things that kept her grounded when days got hard. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing her work had made a real difference. The next week, she gathered the hospital staff for another meeting. This one wasn't about rules or new programs. It was a celebration of how far they had come. When everyone gathered in the cafeteria, Angela stood at the front of the room with a calm smile. "I want to take a moment to thank all of you," she began. "When I first came here, I knew this hospital was full of talented people. But talent alone doesn't make a great hospital, heart does. And over the past few months, you've all shown that heart in ways that can't be measured by numbers." She shared a few letters from patients, without names, just the stories. People who had felt kindness when they needed it most. People who had left with more hope than they came in with. As she read, she saw the faces of her staff soften. A few nurses dabbed at their eyes. Even the surgeons, who rarely showed emotion, looked thoughtful. Angela ended by saying, "We may not be able to heal everyone who walks through those doors, but we can make sure no one leaves feeling invisible." The room erupted in gentle applause. Not loud or forced, but heartfelt. People clapped for each other, not just for her. Afterward, there was laughter, conversation, and a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. Some staff members stayed behind to talk with Angela, sharing stories of small victories, like calming an anxious patient, helping a frightened child smile, or simply listening to someone who needed to be heard. Those were the real success stories, Angela thought. Not the awards, not the recognition. Just the quiet, everyday moments of humanity. As the sun began to set that evening, Angela went up to the hospital rooftop, a place she liked to visit when she needed to think. The city lights were starting to glow in the distance, and the sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink. She stood there for a long time, hands resting on the railing, letting the wind brush against her face. She thought about that night so long ago when she had come to the hospital in plain clothes, tired and unrecognized, how that moment of rejection had hurt, but also how it had led to something good. Sometimes she realized life has a way of turning pain into purpose.